Well, welcome back. It's been a long time since last November. Today I want to cover 5 additional countries. I also wanted to entertain you better. I invited Sally Collender to introduce you to Nicaragua. She lived there for 6 years. That's her keyboard. But she called this morning and said she's detained. So I'm sorry she can't make it. She was there a lot longer than I was. She was there 6 years. Back in 1979, I was invited to go to Nicaragua by the Minister of the Interior. And I went down looking forward, and he took me by hand and sent me over to speak to President Somoza. And the president wanted some assistance in sustainable economic development and in more modern forestry methods, so that forestry actually becomes sustainable. So that's what took me down there. And the great thing about every trip, I can't help anybody until I learn more about the local environmental issues. So in every country I go to, we begin a series of field trips. So I become educated and can do a better job of whatever they want me to do. And that's where the adventures come in, is on those field trips. And on those field trips, almost always the host country provides a graduate student who can translate and guide me wherever we're going. And I usually take a Tennessee student with me to give them a chance to see what's going on in the lesser developed country. So opportunities for everybody. Nicaragua was difficult and confusing. The U.S. military has a long and ominous history in Nicaragua. The U.S. Marines were there to protect American Fruit Company. And in 1934, there were some labor disputes, and so they convened a conference, and they invited to the conference a leader of the indigenous folks that were working there, and his name is Cesar Sandino, and Sandino came to the conference, came in on muleback, and they shot him and his mule. That's an ominous history. While I was, Sandino then became the namesake for the Sandinista Revolution, I think you're all familiar with. That revolution was ongoing the whole time I was there. Sally was there much earlier than that, fortunately. The areas we went to, most of them were pretty peaceful, but up north, on the Coco River across from Honduras, there was a rogue U.S. military unit called the Iran-Contras. And they would come across the river and kill anybody that had weapons. And then they trade these weapons to Iran for drugs, and I don't know why. But anyway, the National Guard was there because the Sandinistas were very strong up north. Sandinistas were there, and then the U.S. military unit, the Iran-Contras. So that area was a real war zone. It wasn't like, well, I'll get to that later. So anyway, to get familiarized with what was going on, my first field trip was to Lago Managua. and the local graduate student named Maria Sanchez, and of course later she got her master's degree with me at Tennessee. And I had one of my graduate students with me, so we were a party of three. And to get around, we got a houseboat. And I did that whenever I could. You can travel, you can sleep, it's a really good way to get around. And so we took the houseboat out on Lake Minagua. And we visited villages. And it was really interesting because the villagers already knew about Somoza's proposal. He wanted to reverse the flow of the water and elevate the level of the lake. So then he could produce hydroelectric power down a ways in La Paz. They knew that was coming, so they were ready. And I thought I was going to meet with a bunch of old-time elders and talk about things they didn't really know about. They were ahead of me all the way. We spent our time interviewing villagers, listening to them, explaining to them what the hydroelectric proposal was about. They pretty much knew anyway. And asked them about their concerns. They were concerned about having to move their villages and rebuild, what kind of help they get. They were concerned about their wheat fields and their cotton fields. Same way, they have to clear the land and start over when lake level went up. They also were very concerned about crocodiles. At that time, they were having a problem. The crocodiles were coming out from the edge of the lake and hiding in the wheat and cotton fields. So if somebody comes walking through the wheat field, bam, and then it's been a continuous problem. And they wanted to know if in what Somoza was proposing, they could get some help for that. So we talked for a while, different villages, and then we repeated our visits and learned what they've been thinking since then. It was really great. They did not call it what I'd call it. They recommended an alternative to the proposal for generating hydroelectric. I would call it ecotourism. They didn't. What they suggested was, instead of doing the hydroelectric project, bring in tourists, and they would provide boats at a price, and drivers, supplies, whatever is needed. From the boats, the tourists could swim, dive, something I forgot about. They could go fishing. One of their concerns was about the exotic saltwater fishes. They had saltwater swordfish, sharks, and nowhere else in the world that I've heard of had these animal species evolved totally to change their environment. They became freshwater. So they were concerned about that. The tourists might be attracted to that. Tourists might want to fish. The other thing, they wanted tourists to come to their villages, and in their villages they could feed them, especially using wheat products from their wheat fields, and crocodiles. We're going to grill crocodiles and feed them to the tourists. It's always an attraction down in Key West, and so they're going to do that. They also wanted to sell apparel, and the apparel was from their cotton fields and the crocodiles. The skins, they make belts and boots and wallets and all kinds of things. They had their own alternative, and they said, get the energy from solar or wind. But all this other would, their parts of their proposal would improve their lives much more. It would also get rid of the crocodiles, because they'd be killing them to use them. Yeah, that was pretty brilliant of them. And so, we finished our trip around Lake Minocqua, went back and rested up. And our second trip was to Bluefields. Bluefields is on the east coast. Minocqua's on the west coast. And the pilot run a cargo plane, and he'd buzz the field, and all the cattle would run off so we could land, but the pigs didn't. The locals would see this, they'd come out and chase the pigs. In the meantime, we had a good aerial view of the village, and then we could land on a pig-free runway. Bluefield turned out to be an entirely different country. No resemblance to living back on the West Coast. The local population, they were descendants of slaves brought in from Africa by the British. Then there were Mesquite Indians, and then there was something our government was interested in, Cuban clergy. They really wondered what's going on with the Cubans there in the churches. And that's the part of Nicaragua where Sally lived. She was north of there a little bit. So it was a very, very different world. And so what happens next? I'm going blank. So anyway, that's when I should use my notes. So we looked around, and what was apparent is there was one overwhelming constraint upon the quality of life and environmental quality on the East Coast, and that was energy. Energy was from diesel generators, propane, very inefficient, costly, and I don't know anything about all that. So I asked Somoza's staff if they would invite 2 energy engineers from Tennessee to come down and make a report on what should be done. So we had some time to kill. Stan was there, Marie was there, I was there, so we just enjoyed living on the beach and discovered a way of living, a way of life I never heard of before. The men worked only 2 months a year. That's pretty good. And they made enough money diving and catching lobster to support them the next 10 months. Paid for housing, for food, for rum, and a woman. That's the way it was translated to me by Maria. We have a resident here, I don't think she's here today, Dee Goodman. And when I told her this story, she says, "Fine, were they married?" I said, "Can you imagine me walking up to some big, burly young guy and saying, 'She sure is pretty, is she your wife or a prostitute?'" So, I cannot answer the question. Finally, the engineers showed up. It only took about 10 days. And they quickly did their work, and I got a houseboat for them again. And the houseboat let us travel up and down the coast and gave us a place to sleep, if we could sleep. At night, there were these loud noises, thud, thud. And the next morning, I asked one of the guys that ran the boat, he said, "Oh yeah, that's just the animals They smell the cooking odors on the houseboats. And they come out on the branches of the overhanging trees and drop down on the deck or on the roof. Most of the animals are snakes. Not all of them. So anyway, they clear all that out before we wake up and go to breakfast. And that's probably the most exciting adventure on that part of the trip. So the engineers went home, and I sent my student Stan home with them, because the next place I was going was too dangerous for him. And I was headed to Wasp Palm. Wasp Palm is northern Nicaragua on the Coco River. Sandinistas are very strong up there in the small rural villages. And the Nicaraguan National Guard was up there to hold check on the Sandinistas. And then, of course, the Iran-Contras were there, and they would kill anybody to get weapons to trade to Iran. The villagers became very fearful. They were really worried about it. So they gave up all their weapons. So the Iran-Contras would have no reason to bother them. There were two American missionaries, a married couple. They were fearful as well. So they left. But what they didn't leave with was the pet leopard they grew from just after it was born. He'd had this leopard the whole time. Well, the leopard was set free, but the leopard knew a couple things. He knows that the village means food, and he knows that the villagers won't bother him. They hadn't in the past. So the leopard had pretty much a free hand until his food supply included two little boys. Then they called to Managua, to the government, and said, okay, we gave up our weapons, we need your help. Come remove that leopard. And that's why I was there. I flew in on a 2-seat plane with a pilot too young to drive a car. But he's the only one who spoke English. And the plane was too old to fly. So the government was not risking much. And we did that buzz of the field again. Cattle, and then people got rid of the pigs, and then we landed, and all the villagers came out. We were going to take that leopard away. They knew approximately where the leopard was hiding out, because they'd take food out occasionally, so the leopard would not come into the village. So they went out, everybody in the village, they encircled that area, they started enclosing on one another, banging pots and pans and whatever else makes noise. And they backed the leopard up to the open door of an outhouse. And then they had a net up on top of the outhouse. So once the leopard was in the outhouse, they dropped the net, came out, they had the leopard. They built a bamboo cage, put the leopard in the cage, and put the cage behind my seat in the that was quite exciting. And so we flew back off to Managua, no problem. Let's see, the third place. Where did we go? That was last time. Well, one of the last places we went was a Caribbean pine plantation. They were very interested in more modern forestry methods. And their procedure was to grow thin Caribbean pines and then cut them at 30 years of age and put them in the kiln and provide lumber for housing. What I suggested to them as an alternative which the ones accepted, was don't cut those trees until they're 100 years old. When you do, lumber will be far superior, and you will have employed people a very long time. So in the meantime, collect seeds of Caribbean pine. All around the tropical world, there is a serious problem, shortage of firewood, and there were firewood plantations going up. And Caribbean pine was the favored species for all those countries, along with eucalyptus. And so, gather the seeds, ship them off, and if you want to make more money, by a factor of about 10, grow seedlings and ship off the seedlings. You can sell them for a higher price. And then, as you do cut trees, remove the stumps and extract from the stumps paraquat. Caribbean pine are rich in paraquat. And they could use that to spray the opium fields, get rid of the opium. And yes, most of you like that one. When I talked to him about Lago Managua, I told him that Stan, my graduate student, was writing his thesis, doing the research for writing his thesis, for an environmental impact of the proposed project on the lake, and focusing strongly on the alternatives presented by the villagers. And I told him I would come back and give him that environmental assessment. So I went off to the Intercontinental Hotel. Two great perks when you're working for a president. I've worked for 4 in my life. This one is very generous. He put me up at the Intercontinental, which is by far the best hotel in the country. Second, wherever I needed to go anywhere in town, he'd send his driver in his golden Mercedes. I enjoyed that, but I didn't think at the time I was a target. Riding around in his car. Well, anyway, I went back to the Intercontinental my last night in town, and the Sandinistas attacked the National Guard Armory next door. And there were bullets hitting the walls, going through the windows of the hotel, and the attendant came in and put my bed up against the window, put me in the bathtub with some pillows, and that night went by very, very slowly. And the next day I flew home. That was really the beginning of the end for Somoza. A couple months later, he fled to Paraguay. A couple months after he was in Paraguay, a bazooka killed him and destroyed my Goldwing Mercedes. I waited a while longer. I went down and met with the new Minister of the Interior. He was the Dean of the College of Engineering at Stanford University, and he resigned to come help his new country. Sharp guy. And so I gave him Stan's thesis describing impacts on Lago Managua and my forestry proposal. And he was very grateful, and he gave me this poster, which I wish I could have wound up. See this back there? Shirley, you see
Yes.
it? Good. And what it says is, Sandino and Fonseca can read and write. Can you? And one of the first reforms they made, I loved it. They closed all the universities. And they sent the students and the faculty to the furthest villages and they were to teach everyone in Nicaragua how to read and write. Once they got to that level, then the universities could open up again and offer their curriculum. I love that reform. What I did not like was kind of like Jeffrey Epstein. You ever hear him? He would reward his political friends with the services of underage women. Well, what the Sandinistas did, they rewarded their soldiers, mostly farmers, with wives. All the unmarried young women were brought into a coliseum. All the soldiers could walk among them and pick out a wife. That's it. I didn't like that. Maria Sanchez, my student, she was one of those young women. And I never heard from her again. So that was Nicaragua. Any questions about Nicaragua? Nope, good. Okay, now we'll go to Africa. First up in Africa, Rwanda. How many of you have been to Rwanda? You have. And why did you go?
Where? Why? I'm a mineral exploration geologist. I was looking for gold.
I figured if anybody's been there, it's because they read Diane Fossey's book, Gorillas in the Mist. And I was invited in Rwanda to be a team leader of the USAID project. They asked us to review it. They have to have periodic reviews, explain to Congress why they need to spend money continuing and all that. So there were eight people in my team, and the host wasn't very gracious. This was his project. He said people back in Washington can't find Rwanda on a map. The people in the African main office, they don't know how to spell it. He said, this is my project, and remember that of all time. Okay. What they were doing, AID was doing, was they were trying to improve the quality of life of the villagers by improving the quality of life of wildlife and wildlife habitat. How are they doing that? Their plan was to develop ecotourism around the mountain gorillas, and then to take the money from the ecotourism and move toward more sustainable development of the villages. Some of the things they do with that money, they would build firewood plantations. They would build maybe some of the Caribbean pine. They would build fences out of trees, and then the residents could prune the trees regularly and get firewood without walking. They would put new water pumps in the wells, and very importantly, they got pipes to distribute the water throughout the village. In the past, the women had to walk a long way to get water and to carry it. I did see a guy once standing there, and I asked him, why are you here? Only women carry water. He said, she's giving birth today. They also built grain storage structures. They got metal roofing to replace the wood and thatch roofs. Cook stoves. They designed new cook stoves that were much more efficient and required less wood. So I'm probably forgetting some things, but you get the message. Okay, so So with that background, we had to hike extensively. Oh, I forgot about that slide. That's back in Nicaragua. Where I realized that I was not in Ukraine, I was not in Gaza, but it was plenty exciting right there in Nicaragua. Let's try the next slide, see where I am. Yeah, we had to hike extensively throughout the mountains of Rwanda. We stayed in the village of Ruangari, which is on the edge of the Virunga Mountain National Park, Volcano National Park. And we hiked extensively, partly to find mountain gorillas, and also to understand other environmental issues going on. For the Mountain Gorilla Project, Diane Fossey brought great attention throughout the world with her book, Gorillas in the Mist. But Diane Fossey became an obstacle. Those gorillas were her gorillas. They were hers to protect and to keep away villagers, and she wanted to protect them from ecotourism. The problem was the U.S. ambassador had to come out and remove her from the national park, or send her back to the States. If anybody in the village would harm the gorilla, Diane Fossey would burn their home down. And the ambassador caught a lot of flack, so he got rid of her. So she actually got everything started, but then she was an obstacle. She was gone. In her absence, there were two graduate students, Amy Vetter and Bill Weber. And Amy and Bill were independently trying to figure out how to develop non-intrusive tourism, focusing on the gorillas. Amy lived with the gorillas. She'd go home at night after the gorillas went to sleep, and she'd be back in the morning before they woke up. They knew her, tolerated her, were always inquisitive. She came back one morning and she had previously sewn a new button on her blouse with a different color thread. Every gorilla in that tribe came over and stared at that thread. Think about how sensitive they are to the environment. Some little thing changes, they know it. So it's very hard to develop non-intrusive procedures. As a result of Amy's work, the guidelines became, number one is distance. Let's have next slide. That's not distance. That's a guide right with the gorillas. You do not get that close to a gorilla. So that was the first thing. The second thing is, never look a gorilla in the eye. That's a challenge. And they'll be on top of you in a flash. Never scare them. Another was wear clothing that blends into the environment. Let's see what else. Well, you get the idea. All these criteria. And Amy and Bill selected 3 tribes of gorillas. They weren't going to interfere with any others. These 3 tribes had been visited by humans in the past. So we tried to minimize any impacts on the gorillas at large, just these 3 tribes. Let's see what else we do there. Okay, back in the village. So anyway, they did develop a very world-renowned mountain gorilla ecotourism experience. had waiting lists up to 2 years to get to go to the park and visit gorillas. And with all of the developments based upon gorilla dollars, the gorillas themselves became too valuable to kill. Nobody wanted a gorilla killed after that. That was their income. And on Friday nights, Bill Weber would get in a pickup truck with a movie projector and go out to other villages and show them what was going on in Lou and Gary, the cook stoves, the grain storage, all of that, and then invite them to come and see. And that way, they were just getting hundreds and thousands more eyes and ears out there to protect the gorillas. So we thought it was a very, very successful program. And with a couple of little suggestions, we said so in our report back to USAID. Got any questions about that? Not gonna make it. Okay, let's go to Kenya. When was it? I got it written down here, but anyway, it was around 1980. The National Academy of Sciences produced a report on new technologies for developing countries. I served on that committee, and when that report came out, USA got a hold of me. I did a lot of work with AID, and asked if I would go to Kenya and organize and conduct a conference on the same title, New Technologies for Lesser Developed Countries. Yeah, I jumped at it, and Deanna went with me. So the conference was to be held in Meru, Kenya, which is up north and east. And that's where we started out. In order for me to learn, then I went on a series of these wonderful field trips. Let's see, what was the first? Oh, the first one, yeah, was the Hopcroft Ranch. This is a private ranch of thousands of hectares, huge. And they raised wildlife for meat, which they sold to local restaurants. But it was the most ecologically based project that I never heard of. They would monitor soil fertility. They would monitor the quality of the vegetation. They would monitor what species are preferred by each species of wildlife. They monitored every conceivable ecological property in order to help them determine herd levels and when to initiate rotational grazing. And it was just a wonderful experience to see ecology used like that. They never killed an animal in the daytime. We only shot them at night to keep the adrenaline out of the meat of the animals. The restaurants they sold to were registered with the government, and with that legal meat supply, the poachers pretty much disappeared, except the ivory hunters. So that was really great, and I invited them to please come to the conference and make a presentation based on their work. Another place we went to send us to up to Meru, and Deanna did not go on that trip. I thought it was too dangerous. It's up to, we went up to Lake Turkana, and it was a convoy, look at the desertification that took place before climate change ever got going. Dead vegetation, dead animal skeletons, it was just a wasteland. And in addition to the desertification, the shifters were coming over from Ethiopia, terrorists, and they would kill anything they could if it had any nutritional value. And so it was an area that suffered immensely. And it became pretty clear pretty quickly. They need a lot of help before they can even use new technology. Well, then they sent us to the south, and we went to Nairobi and Amboseli National Park. Oh, that was wonderful. While I worked, Deanna was floating in a hot air balloon over the Serengeti. I asked Jim if he'd like to do that. He said no, those balloons spooked me in. She had a great time. And what happened in those parks was they had hired the Maasai young men as managers. And they had the knowledge of the local environments and a history understanding. And there are so many of them, and their friends that knew they were employed. Once again, we had the ears and eyes of hundreds of people watching out for the wildlife in the parks. Down there in the south, new technology was spot on, especially technologies that would enhance communications, viewing, and monitoring. So things like night lights high up in a tree where they couldn't get rubbed off, better optics, night vision, cameras, night cameras, radio collars on the animals, little bugs to go in, small animals, so you can track them wherever they were. And the radios provided better safety for the resource managers. They could be warned about poachers. They were also told that they could see if wildlife herds were moving. They especially worked to make access to water holes available for all species, not letting the dominant predators stay around all the time so that the prey species could get in. The technologies were ready to be accepted in the South. So anyway, we moved back to the conference and it started. And there were over 200 attendants, mostly from Kenya, some from surrounding countries, and then representatives of World Wildlife Fund, World Bank, UNESCO, some of those organizations that funded the conference. The conference, I think, went very well. The most memorable experience I have from that conference was someone described a new technology for fences. And this involved like 2 layers of fence and a coil like from a 18-wheeler truck. And when an animal would hit the fence, the coil would collapse. And before the animal knew what was happening, bam! And they end up on their butt. And if you've ever thought an animal had a human-like expression, you should have seen that rhino. Sitting on his tail like, what the hell happened? It was really interesting to see all that. That was memorable. The other thing was a wildlife officer from up toward Lake Turkana said, in the future we welcome all this help, but now it's not improving the quality of life, it's protecting life itself. of people and the wildlife. And he said what we need, jeeps, petrol, guns, ammunition. And until we can get those to protect life, we can't worry about improving life. So I took his comments and highlighted them in the summary of my report, and he got them through a third party. The U.S. would never say, we're sending guns to kill Ethiopians. But he got the jeeps and he got the guns through a third party. President Moy, this was neat. He was so excited about that conference that he had a newspaper publication praising it, describing it, and the international press picked up on it. And Moy treated Deanna and I to a train ride. One of these old, pretty narrow gauge trains. It's all brass and mahogany or something. That was wonderful. We went down to Mombasa on the coast, spent a few days, and came back. I think Kenya and Dan enjoyed more than I did, actually. It's 10 till. I gotta finish with Namibia. How many have ever been to Namibia? You have been around. I think Namibia is the best kept secret in the world. The country should have been named Spectacular. Ecologically spectacular. AID asked me to conduct a training course there. They were concerned a bit about the Cubans. They were fighting in Angola on the northern border of Namibia. And the South Africans had built magnificent roads through the deserts to get up to Angola and back. And the deserts, they're spectacular. In the daytime, every color in the rainbow is on the ridges, the cliffs, the sands, and it's just totally deserted. At night, it's a very busy place. There are people, there are wildlife, and there's even a subspecies of elephant that lives out on the desert, and its cousins live in the forest to the north and east. The Namib and the Kalahari deserts are two of the driest deserts in the world, and they are just spectacular. So, again, I had to take my trips through the country to find out what's going on. And using those excellent roads, we went up to a game reserve, hunting game reserve. And we got in the cars and went down a dirt road. And all of a sudden, the road is shaking and the trees are falling down and the elephants are coming. Have any of you ever experienced that? It's something you remember. And it's just hit or miss. As they come through the trees, they missed us, but no reason why. That was exciting. The next destination was just wonderful. Went up to the coast, the west coast. And when the ocean comes rolling in, there's a deep, deep cold water trench that comes up just off of the shoreline and all the breakers. And this cold water is coming up into the desert air. And a few 200 meters or less inland, there's a cloud forest where all that water becomes clouds. And the species that are there are found nowhere else in the world. You can imagine, as an ecologist, wow, look what's happening. I really enjoyed that part. Let's look at another slide. We forget about it. Oh yeah, that's the, I forgot to tell you about that. This is on that trip to Lake Turkana. And one night, we had a feast, the night before we were to leave. And went in and this long table with tablecloths and stuff. And there was a carcass there, and you just reach in, grab a piece of meat, use it soaked with gravy, eat it. And there were young girls with napkins and claws behind you, clean your fingers, go back. It was really unusual. The reason I wanted to mention it was when we were ready to leave the next day, we wondered if dinner was our driver who disappeared. And we never got an answer. I asked, was that camel? No. Was that goat? No. Was that dog? It's best you retain that thought. Next slide. And, that's in the South. They were ready for ecotourism with these new technologies. Next slide. Oh, yeah. What is that?
Anthill.
Who said that? Termite. Even the termite mounds are spectacular. It's just a wonderful country. I would recommend you go there. And I've got 5 minutes left. Very quickly, I'll tell you another place you've probably not thought about, and that is Uruguay. The UN held a conference there in 1990. I was a keynote speaker. It was on international development and ecology, something like that. And I really enjoyed Uruguay. While Namibia was ecologically spectacular, Uruguay was culturally spectacular. It was the Italian menu mixed with the menu of the gauchos out on the pampas with all the beef and hides that they produced. And at night, everyone would go down to the beach. They'd build fires, they'd dance. Can't do that anymore. Sing, drink good wine. It's just a wonderful lifestyle. With all those cattle they raised, they had a lot of very nice leather goods. Here's my leather jacket from Uruguay. And they were very inexpensive. I've had that for decades. So I would recommend Uruguay. Now, a lot of people have asked me, what were your favorite countries? Brazil, China, Namibia. Least favorite, Sri Lanka and Egypt, because they tried to kill me there. Where would you suggest we go if we're looking for a great time? Namibia, Uruguay, and McKinsey Place. Any comments or questions? No. Okay, good. I go home free. Thank you for coming all the way from Australia. Thanks for having me.
Let's give Frank another round of applause.
And for Wall, who ran the projector, even though I kept forgetting to show the slide.
You have to do it again, Frank.
Frank?
Yeah, 3 times.
If you had someplace you could go to now, where would it be?
Namibia.
You go back to Namibia. Okay.
Namibia. And today's presentation and the one before was based on a book by the same title, 2019, Ecological Adventures.
Wow.
Well, something else I forgot very quickly. USAID funded so much of what I did. They no longer exist. During the list last year, they were dismantled. And in Tuesday's New York Times, they had a full-page article about people in lesser developed countries losing that source of aid. And it also showed that another nation, China, has already begun to move in and provide aid to all those countries. They were formally aligned with us, and now, without AID, they're more aligned with China. I shouldn't have added that. I wanted to live on a high note, like some movie that. I saw this in my. Better leave before I see something else.
We got another question up here, Frank. Frank, we got another question.
Can you do a third time so we can hear about China?
Come here.
I want you to do a third time.
About
This is the
China.
second one.
I'm too old and frail. Don't think so.
Maybe in a year.
You're gonna make your video available to us?